Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. Yes, yeah, I hope so.
Yes, you are audible.
All right, thank you so much. After having heard all my previous panelists who have made excellent comments on so many issues regarding China's hydropower strategy, not just in this region, but also Southeast Asia and also South America. There are so many examples to go by. What I'm going to do in my presentation or my small little intervention would be to look at China's notions of comprehensive national power, which is something that I think we should look into, understand the Chinese perspective on their rights to the waters of the Tibetan Plateau in particular, which they consider as their inalienable right. Secondly, I would also look at the long-term strategy of China, which is, I think, very important to discuss, because the kind of engineering projects that China is implementing and the pace at which they're going about it is something that also gives some sort of signal about where China wants to head with in terms of its policies on water, energy, climate change, and all these different issues that are interconnected with each other. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, as I already mentioned, to this panel with esteemed speakers who have given such a great overview of the topic. So my job becomes somewhat easier now, because I would be just giving, like I said, more of a futuristic perspective on this issue, looking at the large scale engineering projects that China is planning. So to start with, as I mentioned, comprehensive national power. So this is something that is very important to study, because this is very different from the Western notions of power or national power, and the way other countries would perceive power. So what is national power for the Chinese? If you read some of the English version articles that have been shared by think tanks and academies and everything, you would see that it actually means a total of the powers or strengths of a country in economics, military affairs, science and technology, education, resources, and influence. So as you can see, it covers like a vast gamut of issues. Moreover, natural resources are a very important part of this comprehensive national power. So somewhat what Sriparna mentioned about Sanza and other like Confucian thought as well, which actually talks very, very categorically about control of nature, something that the Chinese are very much entitled to. Control of nature is something at the center of its comprehensive national power as well. So natural resources, whether it is arable land, access to fresh water, energy sources, critical minerals, all these are part of its comprehensive national power. So it does not come as a surprise that China wants to use this to enhance its comprehensive national power at the international level, on the way to becoming a superpower or whatever, in terms of the great power dynamics that currently exist in the international system. Coming to what was also previously discussed, I think Mr. Ering talked about it, Honorable Mr. Ering talked about it, so did Sriparna, about the fact that the diversion part. So I think the dams and everything else others have mentioned. Maybe I'll directly go into some of the planned projects. Some of it may sound completely outlandish. In fact, some of the Chinese scientists themselves call it rogue science, with huge ecological consequences and no technical feasibility and all of that. That is how a lot of Chinese scientists themselves talk about some of these planned projects of China, which is a part of the South-North water diversion. I actually wanted to share a particular. I just have one slide actually. If I can just show that would be perfect. If you are able to see the slide. This shows the South-North water diversion project. Are you able to see it?
Yeah, yes, we are.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So I just thought, instead of just talking, if I can show the map, that would perfectly picturize what they have planned. So as you can see, these are the three projects. These are the three diversion sort of channels that they have planned. In fact, the central and the eastern routes have already been completed. So at the center of it is Yellow River and Yangtze River. So far, the diversion projects have mostly focused on internal rivers and not on transnational rivers. The third one is a western route, which is much more controversial. And the plan is to actually connect Yangtze River and Yellow River, even on the western side, which is, of course, in the Tibetan Plateau, as you can see. But in fact, that's not where it stops. Now, there are, of course, some outlandish reports which say that China wants to link Tibet to Tianjin with a Grand Canal as well, something that was, of course, suggested by some of the engineers in the last century. I don't know if they're really planning to do that, because that is going to be in highly seismically active zone. It is also ecologically highly vulnerable. In terms of the impact on India and other downstream countries, it is also important to remember that this also will include the Yarlung Tsangpo or Siang, or the Brahmaputra, as we call it on our side. So this is the map which exactly shows the kind of large-scale geoengineering. I would call it geoengineering because it's essentially meddling with the Earth system itself. So this is what China is currently doing and plans to do as it moves forward with its policies on water. Okay, I'll stop sharing now. Okay. But of course, what is worrying is there are a lot of Chinese officials who are now saying that, okay, it's not enough to just look at our internal rivers. We also need to look at our transnational rivers, like including Mekong or for that matter, Brahmaputra. So slowly, the idea is to move towards transnational rivers, and whether this would lead to unilateral diversion of rivers without having any discussions with the neighbors is something that needs questioning, because as the previous speakers also mentioned, there is a huge lack of transparency when it comes to Chinese activities on these rivers, whether it is in terms of hydropower projects or diversion projects, or as I would come to later on, like weather modification projects, which are also something that China is looking at massively right now. So all of this is part of China's, of course, climate change adaptation strategy, mitigation strategy, because most parts, the western parts and the northern parts of China are arid and semi-arid, requires more water, and the agricultural belt requires more water. So it's somewhat of an adaptation strategy. And in fact, the Tibetan Plateau over there as well is a massive part of this project, because, as I mentioned, I read this quote somewhere mentioned by a Chinese official that the Tibetan Plateau is a very important shelter to safeguard China's environment and ecological system. It has a bearing on the atmospheric circulation, climate patterns over the plateau, and its surrounding regions. Therefore, it plays an important role in water source supply and conservation. So that is the interest that China has in the Tibetan Plateau, which, of course, is something. Tibetan Plateau should not be considered a Chinese heritage only. It is a heritage of this entire region, considering there are millions of people who are dependent on the waters that flow down from the Tibetan Plateau itself. But for the Chinese, it is purely Chinese territory, right? So that is something that, as a very state-centric perspective on transboundary waters, becomes highly problematic. Now, coming to, as I mentioned, the large-scale engineering projects and the control of nature. So, because of the technical feasibility associated with diversion projects, what is also interesting to note is that now China is trying to modify weather and transfer water from one river to another by, water vapor and all of that things as well. So, I don't know if you have read about this project called Tianhe. It's roughly translated as Sky River. With the Chinese, Chinese universities, Chinese defense contractors are involved in implementing that project for a while. It is not yet completed. But in the meantime, China also came up with this announcement in December that it plans to implement this large-scale weather modification project, which would be almost 1.5 times the size of India. By 2025, it would cover like 5.5 million square kilometers, receiving artificial rainfall, maybe also creating this air corridor. Instead of creating water corridors, they're trying to create air corridors by transferring water from the Yangtze River to the more parched Yellow River. All of that is something that they have already been planning. But not much has been written about it. Not much information has been coming out of it, except a few Chinese scientists, again, have called it rogue science, phantom science, and all of that. But yeah, it is happening. It is something that the State Council themselves have said in 2020, which is for artificial rainfall and hail suppression. Mainly, again, it is for their own national interest, whether it is for drought control or hail suppression, for agricultural purposes, ecological protection, to prevent forest fires, to control floods. All these different aspects of ecological security are something they are interested in working out. So this project is very, very, very interesting. If someone wants to look up, this is something, at once when you read it, you find it crazy. But yes, this is something they are looking at, and weather modification, as I said already, is something they are looking at. Almost 500 fuel burning chambers, for instance, have been set up by China in the Tibetan Qinghai Plateau as well. So that's something to look out for. So just to end my intervention here, just talk about the climate change part, which Sriparna also brought up. It's interesting to note that China is also investing in geoengineering, climate engineering projects to a much lesser extent as compared to the Western countries, but they are doing that. Now, we don't know what would be the impacts of these kind of technologies, whether it's weather modification or solar radiation management, carbon dioxide removal. Now, since China has said it would go carbon neutral by 2060, how is it going to achieve it? Is it just about hydropower, solar power, wind power, or is it also going to implement other kinds of projects to achieve its climate targets, right? So that is something that we need to look at it. And so all these technologies that are now part of the Chinese strategy also should, ideally raise some questions as to how they're going about it and whether that would have an impact on this entire region, South and Southeast Asia, as well as other regions that are dependent, like I said, on the waters of the Tibetan Plateau, as well as I mentioned, like these kind of projects also will have an impact on the rainfall patterns, may have an impact because there is a lot of uncertainty, scientific uncertainty regarding the impact on rainfall patterns and all of that as well. So these things have to be discussed. Another very important part here is to discuss Chinese obligations towards international law. Somebody mentioned that, okay, yeah, there is an MOU on data sharing on hydrological data, but of course, Chinese did not share data with India during the Doklam standoff, right? So that happened. Similarly, yes, the military use of such technologies, as I mentioned, may be prohibited by UN conventions to which China is a member. China has ratified, for instance, the Environmental Modification Convention, which states that no country should use this technology for military purposes. But the problem is it is kind of silent about the peaceful use of such technologies, which also may have a long-term impact on the rivers, on the ecosystems, and on the entire region as well. Similarly, China has also ratified the Convention on Biological Diversity, which also states that nothing should be done at this national level, which would have an impact, say, on the regional level or transnational level. But does that mean China is going to live up to that? I'm not sure, even if it has signed up to these international treaties, right? Because we have seen that China has openly gone against some of these international conventions as well in the past. So looking at this kind of very bleak kind of environment, what we can do, I mean, of course, this has been mentioned by the others as well, is to kind of ramp up cooperation with our neighbors in South Asia, Southeast Asia, to get them to talk to China more and more about not just the short and medium term strategies of China that may have an impact on us, also the long-term strategies, like by 2035, they want to advance their weather modification technology to the greatest level, comparable to some of the Western countries. If that is the plan, because of the geographical contiguity that we share, we also have to be concerned about the impact of these policies on the water sources, on the ecosystems, and other factors which are kind of shared. They are shared heritage in the end. So I'll stop there, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.